And it is Jason McLean Questions Everything. Welcome, fellow questioners. This is, of course, the Hall of Questions. I can't even buy it either. It's going to be a great show. We're going to be talking about a lot of wonderful things this evening. And we have a special guest, Chris Holm from Conspire Theory. You've probably seen him in the chat more than once. He is a great guy, and he's going to be a lot of fun. But, of course, before we bring up our special guest to talk about all of the chaos and confusion within the Fortean realm and the fields of study, and we're going to talk about ideological subversion and all that. Before we get into any of that, let's bring up Bigfoot Michigan Rob. You know him, you love him, you love to dream about him. How you doing, Rob?
Thank you once again for embarrassing me, Jason. I get a rise out of it, and I'm so glad to be once again a part of Jason McLean Questions Everything. And tonight, Jason always comes up with a topic that poor BMR has to put on his thinking cap. He makes me think. Unlike Tex, who's kind of, mellow, we can talk about the alphabet. But with Jason, it's more about calculus and trigonometry. But it keeps me on my toes, keeps my brain sharp. And I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to talking with Chris. And if
I can assure you, we will never do calculus on this show.
Thank God. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be a doctor. But when I failed algebra trig in my junior year, when my mother had to come in and plead to the principal to give Robbie a D- because he wants to go to college himself. I don't know how I got into the University of Michigan, by the way, with a D-. My mom and dad, they worked in strange ways. And so
hey, D's for diploma, baby.
That's right, baby. I got it, and I'm proud of it. The Wolverines.
Go Wolverines.
And before we get started, I might as well pay the bills, Jason.
Please do.
The first hour of the show is on Odyssey and iHeartRadio. For all you listening live on those radio programs, you'll get the first hour here. Then you've got to subscribe on YouTube to Texas Front Porch. Type it in on your keypad, hit enter, you'll get the second half. We're also streaming on Bigfoot Michigan Rob. You can do the same for me. Mm-hmm. Jason has a channel called Serial Papers. We don't stream that, but that's a great show in its own right. We're also on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Rumble. You know what? Wherever there's a podcast, you can find us.
Yeah.
We have 5 shows weekly. Mondays, Texas Front Porch is 6:30 Central with Tex and Jason McLean. Wednesday, the aforementioned Jason McLean and myself, Question Everything, 9 Central. Thursdays is Brunch with Bigfoot Michigan Rob at noon Central. This week, we have Kelly Rainbow. We're talking about the sacred Sasquatch tomorrow at noon Central. Serial Papers with Jason McLean follows up later that night at 9 Central.
This week, we're talking about simulation theory.
Simulation theory, another one I'd have to study up on. I'm glad I'll be watching and not co-hosting. I love you, Jason. And on Fridays, of course, the lovely, the talented Jessica Jones, remote viewing investigations, 8 Central. She'll be talking about Lizard Man, a scope, the scape or swamp, something like that. It's the Lizard Man.
Yeah, scape or swamp. In fact, I wrote a comic strip based off of that encounter and actually published it and got out there just before my dad died. So I was happy with that. But yeah, no, Scape or Swamp is an amazing and interesting story. I really want to see what she comes out with on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Now, with no further ado, again, Texas Front Porch. If you want to, hear the second half of this show and get all the shows, it's Texas Front Porch. That's TEX'. It's a possessive.
Yes.
Tex possesses the front porch. So Texas Front Porch on YouTube, Rumble, Spreaker, all the good things. But without further ado, let me bring up the one, the only, the lovely Chris Holm.
Hey, how's it going, Rob? How's it going, Jason?
Hi, Chris.
So far, so good.
Welcome to the madness.
So where can the listeners who may be hearing you for the first time, Chris, where can they find you and what do you do?
I do primarily podcast, and I also do like artistic recreations and just art in general. You can find me on Instagram at Conspire a Theory, underscore between all the words, or on Twitter if you dare. I prefer not to use Twitter at Conspire Theory, or you can find me, on where popular podcast, any podcast, just search for Conspire a Theory, and I will be there. You can listen to my fun shows, interesting interviews, and some of them are a bit abrasive at times. But mostly, I'm just floating around here, just doing my thing and just working on stuff. Primary place to find me is mostly Instagram. That's usually where I will hang out most and
Yes.
be posting most is on Instagram, because it's just a more welcoming place and geared more towards what I do as far as artwork and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, like I said, every time I pop on Instagram, I see you there. Don't worry, I'm going to start putting some stuff up here shortly, Chris. We'll be doing some back and forth. Just got to get a few more things squared away. But on to the rest of the show. So again, I do recommend go subscribe to Chris. We've had him on Texas Front Porch before, so he's just returning. He's an old friend. But yeah, go show him some love. As Tex would say, butter his buns. But I would suggest doing that the most HR appropriate way, unlike Tex,
Right.
Just saying. The man has enslaved elves for hundreds of years. You never, he's a little behind the times on that. HR appropriate way. Subscribe. Say howdy. Great artist. So tonight's topic is a little, I will admit, it is a little more highbrow. It's sort of a larger idea, right? Sort of larger question. And part of I had actually thought about this for a while and finally like, we're just going to do it. And we had Josh Turner on Monday, and some of the topics actually very much interwove with this idea, right? And so one of the I put a link to the video in the description, but there's a 13-minute clip of an interview Yuri Bezmenov did in the late 80s. And he's ex-KGB. He was a defector, and it's one of those things I recommend everyone go and watch it, because while he's talking on a higher political level, I think it's very applicable for the those of us who are in the Fortean world, right? With what we kind of deal with, some of the issues, because the main takeaway from this video is that what the Russians were doing, since the 50s and 60s. It was called ideological subversion. It was the idea of implanting ideas and concepts in a society so that it doesn't really know what reality is anymore. It was to sort of mass brainwash everyone into in as many people as possible into having a point of view that was actually in conflict with reality, so that by the end of this process, you wouldn't know what was reality, what was real, what wasn't. And one of the clips or the quotes from it that really has stuck in my head for years, because I've heard this interview off and on for 20 years now, is you will be able to give them real information and they will not believe it. No matter if you have the photographs, you have the original documents, they will refuse to believe it. And it just in the, like I said, the last couple of weeks, it's been in my head, how much of the, so the question I'm asking is, we have all this chaos, right, in this community, right? We're trying to figure out what is Bigfoot, what is Dogman, what are all these things? We're getting weirder and weirder creatures. We're getting weirder and weirder scenarios. Mm-hmm. Is this chaos just sort of the natural, pervasions of the unknown, or is there something deliberate behind this, right? It doesn't have to be governmental, but maybe the government is involved. Maybe there's something higher involved. But are those of us trying to understand some of these large, some of these weirder ideas, are we facing our own version of ideological subversion? Chris, you are the guest. I will let you go first.
Well, I think what we see is like a lot of us, even normies who like pay attention to just mainstream media and all this stuff, and just general entertainment. There's something going on called the culture war. And right now in the there's the political landscape. There's like political dissenting war, culture wars in there, and it's very easy to see in there. And then we're seeing it spill out into our own community, and with seeing stuff like that come into our community. I mean, I don't think it's really anything new, but it definitely is something that now that we're putting sort of a spotlight on it. It's very easy to sort of see, it may not be as big as we see in mainstream, but it's still apparent. There's like a lot of spillover and stuff like that. So I think some of us, like how sometimes stuff will just pop up out of nowhere. Like I think there was like there was some Slender Man type of phenomena that was popping up just out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But then it quickly, subsided once it couldn't move past the creepypasta. However, one of the entities who could, easily transverse the creepypasta, of course, is the what used to be the Pell Crawler, which is now known as the Rake, that has now become a popular denizen of the paranormal now, that once was in the pages or the web pages of creepypasta is now in our in our sort of Zedic, our Geist type of manifesting in the encounters that people have. And I guess now we're seeing more Dogman encounters and stuff of that nature, and more stories of Bigfoot that are coming up that usually would not even see the light of day, even within mainstream Bigfoot communities. And I think that's mostly due to the social media, as in there's more shows now and anyone can have a show. So now these stories have room to breathe, whereas before in more of a cherry picked sort of Art Bell coast to coast type of event, they might not have had unless it was on a special subversive night or something of that nature. Now everyone can have their own dedicated channels to this stuff. And we're seeing, like, I think a lot of it is because of the explosion of media, of content. I guess people like to call it the explosion of content. That is sort of like a bit of it can be seen as a distraction from like everything that's coming out now. And I hope that's sort of, I'm going along the vein that you were trying to.
Well, no, I think that's an absolutely. I think it's a great point, because I think part of I don't necessarily think that there are a lot of big conspiracies. I think a lot of conspiracies are just corruption, but then they really just have to tweak a few things, and a lot of things will happen naturally, right? Like you said, the explosion of the shows like ours. Let's face it, we got three dumb, ugly guys. Not you, obviously. I'm talking about Tex. Clearly, you're too glorious to have been included in that one, Chris.
Yeah, he's talking to you, Rob.
Yeah. Rob and Tex and me. We got three dumb, ugly guys. Talking about this stuff on the internet. Anyone can, and that creates noise, and within that noise is confusion. So I think that's a natural thing, but that doesn't mean it's not necessarily also part of a directed approach. So your whole point is, it used to be a lot of this stuff was cherry picked, but now it's just everywhere. And so, and that sort of adds on top of that confusion. I think that there's there's a natural aspect to it in that regards, that just as we're trying to explore these things, there is that sort of natural confusion. Rob, what say thee, Robert?
Well, when I first of all, I agree with what Chris said about the aversion to the subject matter, the anomalous subject matter at hand, right? But when I had a little different viewpoint just off the video, Yuri Bezmenov, right? The defector, the defecting KGB. When you talk about the ideological subversions, I think he was trying to implement that as like a non-obtrusive way in which perhaps government is trying to get into the minds of, let's just say, the American people, that our minds won't change, saying things like we have nowhere to go or to run. Certain things that is subtly brought into our communities, like putting a culture out there that is very minute over the past decades since like the Cold War, right?
Right.
where they're trying to manipulate an agenda that is taking the American people away from, the family, the cultural style that we know today as a family, right? Which,
what used to be traditional values, like the
yes,
nuclear family and such. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. It's kind of what I got from it, which can lead to all these other things that we talk about daily: Bigfoot, Dogman, whatever paranormal that you want to get into. And I don't think that with this subversion, they were talking about espionage not being espionage, but in a way, a cultural espionage to kind of break the fabric of our society.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I got out of this that kind of blew my mind away was, and I don't want to get political about any of this, but it was, were they subtly getting into our heads where Democrats, and this is back providing this information 30 years ago,
Closer to 40, actually.
Well, Democrats, they want to bleed into, and let's not even see Democrats carrying the torch for communism.
Yeah. I mean, that was absolutely his claim. I mean, he was making more the Yuri Bezmenov makes the point that it was more about, again, that they were using ideological subversion to create essentially what's called the useful idiot, where they do what you want them to do, and then you put them in the places where you want them to be, and then by the time when the revolution comes, you then kill those people because they're the people who are going to cause trouble anyway. But yeah, that was absolutely his point, was from a political sense. Yeah. But more along the lines of what we're talking about this evening is just the idea that this field, there's so much chaos, confusion, infighting, right? I mean, obviously we don't name names. We are non-drama llamas on this channel,
right?
But there's so much infighting, right? To Chris's point, it's like you got the people who are the apes, you got the woo crowd, and again, as I always say, people, if you're in the woo camp, please, y'all need to have a meeting, right? Y'all need to find another term, because only Ric Flair can get away with saying woo. I'm just saying, just helping y'all out here. But we have this infighting, and then no one's actually having a real conversation, right? And it just adds to more chaos and more confusion. And part of what Chris was saying, he mentioned the Rake, he mentioned Slender Man, Ian and Titan in chat. They were talking about tulpas, right? A tulpa is, it really has been popularized by Nick Redfern as of late. But essentially, these are thought forms. John Keel was really the first one to sort of introduce this idea into the community. But that, if we think about a thing, it can manifest, and that the Rake, the ideas of the Rake or Slender Man are sort of, as people thought about them, that they took manifestation. And I think I would have a slightly different interpretation of that, but but I think it's a valid aspect to this entire question, right? Are we actually making things harder the more we talk about it, the more we entertain these things? Are we maybe adding to that confusion, willingly or knowingly and unknowingly?
I think.
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I think is that, well, I found the Yuri Bezmenov interview interesting. I'm very fresh on it, and it sounds like it could have been said today, and applying to today's stuff. There's this phrase called a little bit, like, what was it? A little bit at once, and then suddenly, all at once, something of that nature, where we're experiencing all at once right now. And I think the flood of social media and the capabilities of it has exacerbated it faster, to the point that even, the cabal or the hidden, those hidden in shadows, I don't think even they can wrestle control of it back. Even though it seems like, an uphill battle depending on which side of the argument you're on. Mm-hmm. I think what we're seeing, I'll try to keep it as centric to paranormal as I can, because I mean, speaking to me, I'm one of those culture war buffs, and I love getting political and all that stuff. And just, I like to do that.
Well, Texas isn't
But
here tonight, so we can get a little political.
But a little, the thing is with the paranormal, I think we do have a parallel in that the traditional camp is like the nuts and bolts, the flesh and boner crowd. That they're sort of the what would be the traditional conservative parallel, which is what I would state. And then we see an influx of existential, multidimensional type of stuff. And we're seeing it, that is sort of taking everything by storm. And I feel like we're seeing a sort of the sort of like be more open-minded argument, and then some people are like, wait, I still need to hang on to my evidence and my proof and stuff like that. We still want stuff. It's like we're getting into a field of talking about stuff scientifically and applying the scientific method like a lot less and less. But then some would argue, well, we're applying the scientific method more by adding more variables to it. And right. I think that what's happening is the growth, because the growth is so explosive. We don't know yet how to apply those extensive variables to a thing that we know what to do with them. Because one of the criticisms that I see of all these ghost shows is, oh, we're gathering evidence. To do what with, though? I mean, you can have all the evidence in the world, and if you don't know how it's applicable to further your hypothesis, then what good is it? And it's just, I think it leads to a headway where there's conflict where there really shouldn't be, where I think everyone's on the same side, but the methods are so they appear to be opposed.
Yeah.
I would agree too. Wouldn't you think, you guys addressed to both Jason and Chris, with these Fortean organizations, right? Isn't that more like based toward an occult or a parapsychology, where it kind of bends information, where they're trying to create an informational war or perhaps disinformation?
Well, so real quick, it occurs to me a lot of people may not know what Fortean actually means. So Charles Fort was one of the early pioneers of cryptozoology and all of this other in the study of high strangeness. So essentially, if you're looking at ancient, if you're looking at what's called forbidden archaeology, like I do a lot, if you're looking at cryptozoology, ufology, the paranormal, it's a Fortean endeavor. But Rob, I agree, and I think that I think both of y'all are right. With Chris, talking about the adding in variables that maybe weren't considered before, right?
Yeah.
And I think there is that. I think there's that natural conflict of, well, everything's got to be flesh and blood, everything's got to be what we're familiar with, and other people are saying, no, let's take a look at some of this other phenomena. And then to Rob's point, I think also a lot of problem with when you start getting into the paranormal is, I think both of y'all were saying kind of the same thing. It's like, well, hey, we're gathering evidence, but to what end? Right? Like are you really gathering evidence? Right? Because there's a legitimate question there. It's like, what evidence is actually being gathered? And to Rob's point, some of that does seem like it's manipulated a little bit. Like it's maybe more on the flash and the television side than on the actual data side. And doesn't that also lead to the conflict you were talking about, Chris?
Yeah. And it's like, I'm just posing these questions. I don't have an answer, of course. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that, it does have a thing where all of us need to sit at the same table and have a long conversation about this. And of course, us taking this initiative, we're sort of doing that in a little bit. And it's just a sort of, I would say, is that with, there is a chance that we have this, because we're so used to yin and yangs, mm-hmm. that two things can be true at the same time. It can be flesh and blood and interdimensional, because in its dimension, it's flesh and blood. It's crossing over to our dimension, being flesh and blood. And then when we see it woo out or whatever, it's usually in transit, as far as we know, maybe to another dimension. And I'm just throwing a hypothesis at the wall. I'm just throwing speculation. What this sort of like, it has to be absolutely this or the other type of thing. It's just, there's still so much that's out in the weeds that, again, like, we don't know what to do with it. Like, we have EVPs and videos and stuff like this, and according, this is popular in contactee phenomenon, that you can't trust, electronic, in electronic equipment with the alien phenomena, because they will cancel each other out. And that usually happens with ghosts and stuff. They have a knack of knocking out stuff of that nature. And I guess one of the most prominent arguments that I've heard of that was the Patterson-Gimlin film, where the Patterson-Gimlin film, it was as analog a recording video recorder as you could get, having the absolute smallest minute of battery power and electricity running it. And it was able to get one of the most, definitive, arguably definitive and interesting pieces of Bigfoot evidence ever. And I haven't seen anything since then, made with modern technology that has been able to even eclipse it or come close to that film, in my opinion. And it's just, but we're so married to our, modern technology and stuff like that, which I can understand, because it's so easy to use now.
To your point there too, Chris, is like, if anybody that follows our channel, they know our stance is pretty much, we're not, for politic terms, we're not left flesh and blood and right paranormal. I think for the most part, I can speak for our team, is that we know there's flesh and blood. Let's just talk cryptids in general, not singling out any cryptid. There's flesh and blood. There's a paranormal side. There's different realms, different realities, and that's the blend that we try to this day discover, right? And sometimes when you're in the forest, what you're looking at, you might think it's a Bigfoot, but it might be something out there that wants you to think or perceive that it's a Bigfoot, right?
Right.
And a lot of times when you're doing an investigation, or if you're going on an expedition, there's a lot of smart entities out there that know what you're up to. And I think they like to play games with our mind and our psyche. They want to convince you that there's something that they're not. Now, with that being said, I do believe in Bigfoot and the flesh and blood side. I do believe in the cryptid side. I do believe in the paranormal side. I do believe in the communication. But is that communication something that we know 100% is what it is, or something else? I do believe Bigfoot does communicate with people. But I also believe that other entities perceive or pretend to be Bigfoot to get you going down a different avenue, which could be nefarious.
Well, and y'all have basically gone exactly where I wanted to go, because Tex was over a year and a half now, famously asked, because we were doing our little back and forth. I was deciding just to be play devil's advocate, as I do, right? We were going back and forth, and he said, "What if Bigfoot's the distraction?" And that has really set us on this whole new sort of direction of investigating and asking some of these questions and re-looking at all the phenomenon, right? Not just Bigfoot, but a lot of it. And he's sort of, he's come up with what he calls the cabin in the woods theory, right? For those who may not have seen the film, okay, spoilers for a movie that's 15, 20 years old now. Essentially, all of the horror movies that we've seen, it's sort of it's a meta critique of horror films, right? But the thing is, all of these horror monsters and things are controlled by this organization that they're sacrifices, right, to these ancient quote unquote gods. Of course, the gods are actually the audience, but the whole point was they were presenting things so that the people they were trying to terrorize would become would die in a particular way to satisfy these beings. And his whole point is, what if there is something out there higher that is directing a lot of this paranormal activity to drive us into, again, this ideological subversion of confusing us. Sometimes it's appearing as Bigfoot. Sometimes it's appearing as, like Josh described on Monday, this tall humanoid spider thing. Sometimes it looks like the xenomorph that I described on Monday as well, where this thing is being seen by 3 different groups of people around the same home, and yet it's clearly a paranormal entity going in between walls, right? That's one of the things I talked about, where it's like you start seeing these overlaps between the UFO community, Rob, as you said, these abductions, and yet you also have these paranormal encounters. They're all seeing the same thing, or they're encountering the same phenomena, but it looks different, right? This guy, they're all describing the same abduction phenomena, but this guy sees a demon, this guy sees a gray, this guy sees a giant bird dancing on a thing, right? What we have is, when you take that step back, confusion. But is that confusion deliberate, right? Is it so that we don't recognize what it is that we're actually looking at?
Yeah, and I can see that, because then we're entering different camps trying to lay their blanket explanation as to what it is. Where you're going to have people coming up like, no, it's a demon. We need to apply X, Y, and Z to it, methods, and categorize it as such. Or it's like, no, it's an alien. We need to apply X, Y, and Z. It's like, and then the druids come out. It's like, no, it's a fae. We need to apply X, Y, and Z. And I can understand that sort of being a thing. And I don't know if so much there is a definitive X factor occurring, which is the initial phenomenon itself, and then our perception of it. I don't know how much we can attribute our perception of it to the entity itself. Like we assume it's smart because it's able to mask itself as whatever, whereas that could just be a natural instinctive response that it does naturally. I mean, crabs have a hard shell. Predators have a hard time cracking them. That doesn't mean that they're smart, that they know to be armored. That's just how they naturally conduct themselves in the wild, and how they've been, born and stuff like that in nature with these phenomena. They could just be going about their business, doing their thing, and us just encountering them, seeing them. It could be simply us reacting to their presence, by our preconceptions, or by the mask that we assign to them subconsciously, and
Mm-hmm.
and they could just be going about doing whatever it is that they do naturally. This could be an X factor of some sort. I mean, because like a spider is in his cage and he's being fed, a worm. Does he conceptualize the tweezers and the hand that are holding it, that are feeding him? Or does he just conceptualize, I'm a predatory guy. Oh, a prey has entered my turf. Time to act.
Yes, Chris, I did want to address something Strangeland said. Rob, as you know, there's enough cryptids unknowns that they can't just be their self with own actions and sounds. So hard to push the point is everything that makes a sound or print is called a Bigfoot. No, that's not my point, Strangeland. It's the fact that people, I don't believe that, but there are people that are in the woods that maybe, hey, they're looking for Bigfoot. I've got a story. This is an encounter story that someone emailed me. A group of guys are sitting around at their campfire, about their 3rd day on an expedition. They were looking for Bigfoot. They were novices, but not novices to the forest. They were hunters, avid hunters, 20 years experience. At the end of their 3rd day in the forest, around the fire camp, they're telling stories. During these stories, all of a sudden, the night air grew chilled. A wind came upon the campfire, put out the fire. In the distance, they see some glowing eyes. And in the distance, the stories that these gentlemen were talking about was reiterated back to them word for word. If just like I'm speaking now, what I'm saying now was reiterated word for word. Now, it was not in their voices. It was in a monochrome voice. It kind of had a tinny sound to it. Now, I do know that Bigfoot can mimic speech. I know that Bigfoot can mimic animals. But when these gentlemen said it was word for word and in an unusual sound, I'm afraid that's not Bigfoot. So I'm not saying that just because you hear something as Bigfoot. No, it could be, it might not be. So what was this encounter these guys had in the forest? I'm not going to say with 100% certainty it was not a Bigfoot. I'm guessing it was something more alien or more spiritual or something even further nefarious.
Well, and this goes back to something we say all the time, right? You see a 7-foot tall, 8-foot tall, dark figure with red glowing eyes. If it's out in the woods, it's a Bigfoot. If it's in somebody's room, it's a demon or a shadow person or whatever your fill in the blank word is. The problem is, it does seem as if that this other phenomena that is not Bigfoot wants to be seen as Bigfoot. We have phenomena that when if you just look at what people actually observe, right, what they actually encounter when they recount their abductions, or missing time stories, we have people who are paranoid, they're ghost hunting and they have the same event. They're out driving home and they see a bird man and they have the same event. Sometimes it's trolls, sometimes it's a demon, sometimes it's a gray alien. My problem is we're having the same phenomena, but it all looks different, right? We have, again, how often do we have people go fairy hunting, right? They go and they look for the fae, like in Iceland, and they have the same kind of problems that a lot of us, with their electronics, that a lot of us have in the woods when we're Bigfoot hunting. The question becomes, at a certain point, what if there are physical cryptids that are running around, living pterosaurs, Bigfoot, all these things, right? I'll even throw some dogmen in there. But then there's this other stuff that seems to want to look like these things. And again, shapeshifters, tricksters. This is part of every mythology across the world throughout all of time. Maybe the bigger problem here is if this trickster, these shape-shifting entities know what they're doing, are they deliberately trying to, again, ideologically subvert us to demoralize the community so that we never actually so that we get to the point where no one ever believes anything anymore. Mm-hmm. Right?
Do you remember the Godzilla 98 Godzilla movie, right?
Yes, I do. I'm a Godzilla fan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there was a part where Godzilla was hiding in the buildings, and the commander, he was getting all angry and pissed off. And then Matthew Broderick's character came up and he said, "This isn't an enemy trying to evade you. This is a natural animal acting out of instinctual self-preservation." And that's what I think is happening here, is that we're encountering a manifestation of something. And this is just my speculation. Yeah. Is it perhaps we're encountering a something, and then when it manifests in a house, we have silverware being tossed about, and strange voices and shadows in other rooms and stuff being seen about, and we write that off as a poltergeist. And then but if it doesn't happen in a house, if it happens within woodlands, then we have rocks being thrown about, because that's all that's available to be thrown about. And of course, that behavior is attributed to Bigfoots and stuff like that, of that nature. And then they, then we hear like banging in the distance, and then we hear like noises, be it the robotic voices or the samurai chatter grunts and stuff like that. And again, that is attributed to Bigfoot as well. And I think that's sort of the same line where something is happening, whether it's intentional from the entity or the phenomenon or whatever manifestation is, that I think we're in a position where we're attributing intelligence and intent to it, where there might not be none, as far as we understand it. I'm not saying that there is or isn't. I'm just saying we don't know exactly for sure if that's what's happening, because
that's a good point.
That we've seen this familiar behavior happen within a dwelling. We call it a haunting. within woodlands, which is not a specific dwelling, we refer to it as Bigfoot activity. Or at least that's the label that we have at the moment. I think I've heard people use the term forest poltergeist as well, because a lot of Bigfoot encounters are often regarded as not actually physically seeing anything, but rather a presence, like the
Right.
ultrasound bearing, which, if that was to happen inside of a dwelling, it would be a demonic oppression. But in the woods, it's ultrasound being hit by ultrasound.
Infrasound, but even then, I again, that's speculation. Is if it's infrasound, if it's is an EMP, so sort of an electronic or electromagnetic thing. So let me ask the question one, because I like what you're saying. It's like, well, hold on, what if a lot of the stuff isn't necessarily like they're not trying to do it deliberately? Maybe they're responding to us, right? Back to the tulpa idea. What if this more paranormal stuff, these shapeshifters aren't really shapeshifting, they're simply reflecting us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not all the time, but oftentimes our culture sort of front loads whatever it is that we're going to see in some cases. Like someone seeing a gargoyle, they may not be an avid cryptid person like us, but if a person sees offhand, they see that they're describing it as best they can with the limited vocabulary and experience that they have. I'm sure if they were to see something else that would be more closer to it, they say, oh, it was actually that. But as far as they know, that's how they can best describe it, and that's why people, would often presume that the Fae are actually, just a primitive form of the Greys or something of that nature, because they look so similar, when it could be a being that looks like neither as far as our pop culture has painted it, but it could be just something that's sort of an in-between. And it's just that's how it's interpreted based on who encounters it and how they react to it, rather than it presenting itself as XYZ.
Chris, that's a good point. I like a lot of your points you made there. And I got a question to pose to you guys. Years ago, just to say 30 for a number, we've had researchers, cryptid researchers, probably, let's just say Bigfoot researchers, cryptids, Dogman. I don't know. I think he came about in mainstream for what we do, maybe in the 60s, I guess. So let's just go back 1960, Bigfoot researchers, and they're out there. Now, as years go on, you see more and more people investigating paranormal activity. You see people investigating ghosts, hauntings, different realms, different realities, and they're in the woods. Now they're out there. And now they're collecting this information. And irregardless of Bigfoot, but these other phenomenon are out there. And they know what you're doing. Do you think that by people that are in the forest and the woods looking for the paranormal, and we can maybe put Bigfoot into that category, do you think that they're actually giving energy to these forces that are not even a Bigfoot? Do you think that we are actually manifesting our own realities? Because what we're trying to do is discover Bigfoot. Yet we're giving energy to other entities not even related.
Yeah, as in, I guess as I can best interpret what you're saying is like, are we making the tree falling in the forest sound by being there?
Yeah.
The sort of observer, by observing it, we make it real type of thing. Whereas if it's just a tree falling in a forest, it's just a tree falling in a forest. Anything that it does and reacts doesn't technically become sound until we're there to observe it and make the sound waves hit our eardrums and reverberate and create those, electronic signals that are interpreted by our brains, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that I think is that, yeah, I do think we are providing a battery by being present, because I don't know exactly what, but somehow, I don't know. I mean, we know that animals such as cats and dogs can see something, and maybe they could see it better than I can, because they're attuned to more spectrums than us. and when they freak out at something, we don't always know why. And for some people, a cat or a dog can see something way before we can.
Yeah, and again, what I'm saying is too, I'm not just saying that you're looking for Bigfoot and he's the one pretending, because that's a different subject. And I know certain people. I've seen Bigfoot. I know what it is, right? And I guess my premise is, I'm talking about some other entities, right, that just want to trick us. Because I know that certain people communicate with a Bigfoot, have communications. I know that some people have communications with ghosts. But I'm just wondering if what my point is, with so many people doing this now, it has to be tripled from 30 years ago. So I think that a lot of these things in the forest could take advantage of that, right, and trick us. And I think it's a manifestation that we as a society or as researchers, we give them fuel to the fire, creating that energy.
Yeah, if
that
somehow
makes sense.
If somehow our interaction is somehow providing them substance, then yes, it is personally reasonable that more of whatever it is that's out there would swarm to feed, provided that we're giving them a steady diet, like the habitual thing where, any animal, you start feeding it, it's going to come around more. And then the second you stop, it's going to lash out because you've been conditioned to receiving substance.
Right. So then let me ask one more question here before we have to end our hour. Is there a governmental hand in creating this disinformation or this ideological subversion, this confusion? Is it that there is because we've heard the stories, and I know a lot of us have had personal encounters, I have to be very, very vague on this, where people who would have inside knowledge on a few things here and there, I can honestly say from the people we've spoken to directly, more on a superficial level, not like deep throat. Wow, that was just terrible. But not like, upper echelon thing, but then you see I have to stay really vague on this. But then they get notifications that make it very clear they can't talk to you anymore, right? So it does feel like that perhaps the government has a hand in trying to create this subversion, right? And that they are, and so the question becomes, A, why would they create that subversion? But B, is it just because they have political agendas, or is it because there's something maybe higher going on? Are they perhaps in contact with something higher that doesn't want us to know what this other thing is?
Yeah. I can understand the speculation of a shadow government to implement that, because from what we've seen of our natural government, it being able to pull off this subversion and maintain it so well that we're constantly, upended at every turn, is level of competency that if our, domestic natural government had, we probably would have all of our roads would be perfect, and there would be no potholes anywhere that would exist ever, type of thing. But it's just, but at the same time, can you create something by simply not participating? Because we look to the government for validation. Just look at the UFO anything. We're constantly looking at government to validate our speculation, to validate our theories. We want official validation from them. And I don't think we see this anywhere more than, in the American to the American government relationship. And I think that, maybe they are, but it's not by participating in it, but by simply not participating in it, by constantly keeping the door closed and telling us no, that they leave us to spin in our circles, that we're we're sort of running ourselves wild. That all they have to do is say no, and then we imagine, what's behind the door is even worse, and we freak out because of that. It's like the whole less is more, like Jaws is the scariest movie because you barely see the shark until the last
right.
15 minutes type of thing. It could be that sort of phenomenon where
Jaws,
by minimizing their participation in it and minimizing what we're allowed to see, and at least maintaining a level of competency to that we can, that it breeds absolute conspiracy, that maybe like you said, is that the distraction that we're sort of running ourselves raw by wondering just what is going on.
All right, we're going to put a pin on that real quick because we've come to the end of the hour. Rob, sign us out.
I did want to sign us out, but I have to say hello to everybody in chat because I'm not communicating on the keyboard. But I did have to give a special shout out to a special someone, my little Christy sci-fi gal. I love you, baby. Good to see you in chat. I know you don't like what I'm saying half the time, but me and you, we're one. With that being said, everybody listening on iHeartRadio and on Odyssey Radio, subscribe to Texas Front Porch, hit the enter button. You'll catch the second half of this great show with Chris Holm and Jason McLean. And you know what? Some dude named Bigfoot Michigan Rob. We're simulcasting on that channel as well. Subscribe to that. Jason, take us to the break.
All right. Everyone who is on YouTube, stick around. We're taking a 5-minute break. We're going to come back, and I'm going to push back a little bit on Chris's comment there because I think there's a little more to explore. We'll see you in 5.
Four minutes to go, folks. 4 minutes. Three minutes. We're almost there. 2-minute warning, guys. 2-minute warning. One minute. 1 minute.
You know, every time it ends and it tells you to get your popcorn ready, I'm always disappointed because I don't have popcorn. You know, should probably talk to Tex about that. Well, again, if you haven't already, like, follow, subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, share us out to your friends, your loved ones, your frenemies, whatever. Help us grow, help us get the good word out and have some better conversations. And we're having a lot of other places. We've got to have more and broader conversations. I see Rob hasn't quite returned, but Chris is. We're going to pop him up. Hey, Chris.
I figured I'd probably go dark for a little bit.
There you go. Silent running. And Rob has returned. Hi there, Rob.
Hello.
We missed you.
Yeah, I know. I was just conducting some personal business.
All right, well, we'll leave it at that. I wasn't going to ask.
I know we're talking about not to steer the direction of the show, but I did want you guys to chime in on this comment I have to make. I did watch that video about Yuri Bezmenov.
Yeah.
And here's what I gathered from this, and this is a little bit political. Just
Again,
little.
Tex ain't here. We can stray a little bit from while Tex is away. Jason and Rob will play.
And I'm sorry for people in chat that went all, Sasquatch woo, but I have to ask this because I won't be able to ask it otherwise. In that video, it seemed to me like he was describing, I'm talking about Yuri Bezmenov, was describing
Right.
the people who became oligarchs. What do you call that? Oligarchs.
Yeah.
Oligarchs. It seems like way back 60s, maybe prior. I'm saying 60s.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they stole all the wealth from the ex-communist countries, right? They got all the wealth. When they took all the wealth and they're utilizing that actually to manipulate the country for the long term, but they shortly and slowly are implementing it in our culture. Does that make sense to you guys, or am I just all wet with that comment?
I think the reason that this, like you said, I've known about this interview for like 20 years, right?
Okay.
Good. But the thing is, it's making the rounds again.
Yeah.
Because there's a new generation that's just hearing this stuff for the first time.
Right.
And they're all saying, this sounds like it could have, like, this is the mid to late 80s. This sounds like it could be today. Like, he could be describing what's going on today.
Could be, yeah.
This is why this keeps, because, and this actually kind of ties into my point with Chris. And again, we don't have to stay on topic this hour. It's the second hour. It's free. It's free swim here. So anything can happen. But to that point, I think the reason it has been around forever. The reason it keeps getting brought up is because it is so timely. Because that's exactly what we're seeing is this broader manipulation of the American people and really of the world, right? It's not just us.
No,
it's the world, right?
Yeah.
No, but to your point, absolutely. Which brings me back to because here's the thing about Chris's comment that I completely agree with. Saying nothing is oftentimes a greater manipulation than saying something. There's an episode. Babylon 5 was the greatest television show of all time. Anyone, I'll cut anyone who says otherwise. But in the second or third season, third or fourth season, there's this scene where the commanders or the captain who's running everything, he's trying to get these alien races to join him with something and to kind of come back together because they've defeated the great big bad from season 3, but now he's trying to get everyone to shore up. And so he sends out some of his ships, and he's like, he doesn't tell anyone what he's doing. He's like, go destroy some asteroids and then come back. They do that. He then tells one of his other people who's doing these broadcasts, he's like, tell them absolutely nothing happened in this sector. It's like, just whatever, just tell them nothing happened. And then if anyone asks, tell them we didn't do anything. We didn't, we're just, nothing happened. And of course, by the end of the episode, they're all like, we've got to sign on to this treaty because in their minds, there's this other invisible enemy out there that only they can see, that only these ships can see, and that they're freaking out and they need their protection. And nothing happened. It literally was just him saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, we didn't shoot anything. It's the saying nothing, right? It's the Jaws theory. What you don't see is scarier than what you can see. To the point, I do think that a lot of governmental manipulation can be just a deliberate, we're not going to talk about that. Or they give you, again, that stupid, well, it was just swamp gas bouncing off, or the light of Venus bouncing off. It's so preposterous, you're like, they have to be lying.
Yeah.
Right. So
there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. Yeah.
Exactly. And that in and of itself is enough, because we do know that they actively manipulate, the DoD has actively manipulated UFO researchers to cover black projects, to give them cover for things. The UFO phenomena has been really useful for them in that way. But I think that this also occurs in the cryptids and some of these others, in that it's their lack of motion that allows them to sort of create that chaos, because we create it with ourselves. Because like you said, we're looking for that validation. So let me start with, I completely agree with you in that. My pushback is this. The idea, because I have a similar theory that, the reason I don't believe in a lot of conspiracies is the idea of hyper competence, right? It's like, there's just no evidence anyone's that competent. But your point is, well, if they were so competent that they could do all of this active manipulation, they'd be hyper competent, and therefore we'd never have potholes, and they'd run everything effectively. And the fact that they aren't is evidence that they're incompetent. I would ask, maybe it's actually evidence that they are hyper competent. They're just not trying to fix the problems. They want the problems so that we vote them in. Because I think that's an equally valid interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Which goes back to Rob's whole point, right? It's like, maybe a lot of this manipulation, that they're doing to drive us, it's like, well, a lot of the things that drive us that way is, a bad economy, is injustice, the fact that things are falling apart, that on and on and on. Well, who's to say that's not part of the plan, right? That they're not actually trying to solve the problems. They want the problems to remain. So they're like, oh, we've done everything we can. And so that pushes us down a road so that we're asked, because think about it, we, as a population, people keep asking for, certainly not me, we keep asking, but as a population, we keep asking for more and more government, right? We keep wanting, big daddy government to govern us harder, right? And fix these problems. Well, maybe it's because the problems are there because they want the problems to be there.
Yeah. And on the counter, so much is going on that people want to check out and be left alone. And that act of leave me alone is now being interpreted as, oh, you're a nationalist white supremacist. You just want you and your own to have your thing and not be inclusive of all of our neo-divergent diversity inclusiveness type of X, whatever it is. And I think that is also a factor as well, because I'm waiting for the moment when we find Bigfoot evidence or more Bigfoot evidence of whatever, and then someone has to, well, how do you know, I'm waiting for the moment that Bigfoot gets misgendered. I'm waiting for it.
Well, that happens to Rob all the time.
Well, yeah, it's happened only once, but I think I was 6, and and my parents won a nice lawsuit on that one.
Well, but to the point though, that brings us back to again the whole the most infamous quote of the Yuri Bezmenov video, which is, you can give someone good information, actual photos, the original documents, and they won't believe it. A lot of us think we've come to that point where we could have again, I am not pro kill, but let's say a Bigfoot gets hit by a truck, we take the body, boom, here it is, and everyone's like, nope, it's a fake. Right. Or I find, maybe I come across one of the pterosaurs, right, that I'm looking for here in North Texas. I find the body, take it in, boom, and it's like, nope, it's a fake, because no one's going to believe it. Right. Even if you have the actual evidence. And that does feel like it's not just hey, it's just that people are confused. It feels like that's more of a deliberate choice or a deliberate action to create that, again, that demoralization.
Yeah, that is an interesting take.
Yeah, I like the take. And one more point regarding, we're talking earlier about the Yuri video. I mean, I got questions on this. I was just wondering, do you think that, okay, the Soviet Union of years ago, now Russia, we haven't heard a lot about them, until, of course, this last maybe 4 or 5 years, they're coming to the forefront as bad. We always knew they were communists, right? Even though they're not, they say they're not. But do you think, though, that with this new, like when we talk about ideological subversion and the manipulation that's, I think, being diverted into, I mentioned the USA, but the world, and we all know about China. I remember being a kid, everything that I saw on the back of a doll or a toy said made in USA. And this is nothing new to anybody, but this is food for thought. Now we see everything says made in China. And I think when we talk about this slow manipulation of the fabric to be destroyed here on the planet, frankly, China probably is taking over as the new CCP, right? The new Soviet Union. Yet our major media doesn't really talk much about it, although we know they're our enemy.
Well, I'm terrible with names. It was anyway. The previous, I forget who he was in the previous. I just can't remember his name, but he basically came out and said, he was in the State Department. He came out and said, look, the Chinese government has infiltrated every level of our society.
Yep.
Right. And this is nothing new. I mean, why do you think everything moves to China for production? Like, Why do you think again, this goes back to the idea that maybe they are actually more, not hyper competent, but perhaps our government's much more competent than we realize. The problem is what they're doing is very deliberately selling us down the river so they can make the cash. I have a story. I was told, again, almost 20 years ago now. Woman I worked with, she said that her mother used to be a nurse for, I think I've told the story before. I think I told it on Monday. But anyway, she told me what her mother had told her, which is that she was a nurse for a very, very wealthy individual, someone who would make Ross Perot look like he ran a dollar store. And she was his nurse, and he would tell her all the time, that there is a larger plan to devalue the dollar and to move a lot of their stuff overseas, because we can't have a one world government unless there's a one world currency. They had to even out the buying power. And they said it was easier to take away from us than to build up the buying power of these other currencies. So to do that, they had to destroy our economy systematically, turn us into a consumer base instead of a production base. And so that would devalue our dollar through inflation, but then also through in trading. And that's what we're seeing. It used to be, I took it down. Like you could go to Honduras, right? Even, mid 90s when I was there, it like one lempira or $1 got you like so many lempira, it was stupid. Like it was just insane. You could tip somebody with 50 cents and it would feed them for days, right? Like it was an insane amount. Like the discrepancy was insane. That's been cut by almost 2/3. Our money is not worth that much. And so her whole point in telling me this, she goes, look, this is all part of a plan, right? She's like, this is happening and it's deliberate. So your point is, we used to make everything here. Now it's all made in China by slave labor, by people who are chucking themselves out of, and even the people who aren't technically slaves, like the Uyghurs, they're the people who are, their working conditions are so terrible that they're just chucking themselves out of buildings. So they have these nets to catch them, right?
Yeah.
Also, we can have cheaper cell phones, cheaper Nikes, cheaper whatever, right? Because we can't even make this stuff here. We can't even drill for our own minerals here because it's all been shipped overseas through regulation. So yeah, I mean, to a point, this seems very, to Yuri's point, actually, it seems very planned.
And the thing too, really briefly, is like it's like back 30 years ago, you would never see anything that said made in the Soviet Union, made in Russia, the CCCP.
Right.
And my thing is China, we know that they're our enemy. We do. But then against some Americans, it's a false sense of security because anywhere you go, made in China, we do business with China. We bought oil from China. We until Trump was president, tariffs until he stopped that. But now, so
actually, China doesn't have oil. That's the one thing they don't have.
The oil, right? But other imports, exports.
Yeah.
The thing is this. I think they're smart, and we're talking about the ideological subversion. It's just slowly, methodically is ingrained in our society because a kid that's 5 years old sees something made in China. So we as a society, a lot of us, not me, not you guys, probably a lot of people in chat, but there's a majority of people, I'm telling you right now, they're smart because we're kind of lulled into, it's only China. When only China is probably going to be the next, if not already, the next superpower.
Well, and that's one of those things that happened again. Was the war in Ukraine a planned thing? Because again, under Bush, they had you had Russia go after Georgia. Then under Obama, we had when our current the former vice president was overseeing Ukraine, we had them take Crimea. All of a sudden, they got real quiet during Trump, and then boom, as soon as people more again back in that mindset get back in power. Oh, now we're going to take Ukraine, and we're like, oh, we're doing so much to help the Ukrainian people, just so much help, so hard. But what's happened? Ukraine, China, and India, like that really should freak everyone out right now. Is India? They've started this is one of those things that again the media doesn't talk about. And this goes back to the whole thing that this is all by design. They're forming their own economic bloc. Like they got off the eSwift system that we have, right? That's part of our power. They've now, if you want to do business in Russia or China or India, you got to start using their system. Like this is becoming a real issue where they are starting to, because China has that idea of the Belt and Road project where they want to basically run through Iran, through the Middle East, into the Mediterranean through Israel, right? So they're building this new economic bloc over there that's going to leave us high and dry. And they're doing it very deliberately. We're not doing anything to stop it. In fact, we're promoting it through our actions and inactions.
Yeah.
I don't know much about the Ukrainian conflict. All I know is Ukraine used to be like the number one for human trafficking and all this corruption. And then now, there are bullied little brother that we got to do everything to protect. Nothing matters anymore except taking care of them.
Yeah, it's again, it's very easy to make an argument all this is incompetence, but I think it's maybe a little cynical, but to say maybe they know exactly what they're doing, which brings us back to all the other disinformation, the demoralization. Here's the problem: we can't even see or say definitively, is it just that that the people running our country are idiots, or are they doing it or are they screwing everything up deliberately? We can't even say that for certain. That's demoralization. In the same way, we can't look at any of this other phenomenon and maybe come to an educated decision. We can't even tell what's real and what's not anymore. That's all demoralization.
Yeah.
And so it's leading us to fight amongst one another. It's leading us to have these conflicts and to just, I'm sorry, I'm still laughing at the fact that you said the flesh and boner crowd because I'm 12. But you know, you've got the ape crowd and the woo crowd, and then you've got all these other crowds. It's like everyone's fighting amongst one another. The metaphor I used at the Alabama conference is, it's like we have two different groups at a table. They each have half of the puzzle, but they're only putting the pieces of the puzzle on the table that they like. And so the problem is now we're arguing over what the puzzle is, but we don't even have all the pieces on the table. We can't say we can't even say what the image is on the puzzle because we don't even know what it is. We don't even have all the pieces, but we're fighting. You know, we're jumping the table and throwing chairs at each other. You know, over what the image is, but we can't know that because we don't have all the stuff.
Yeah, and we're all on different sides of the table, so we see different perspectives of the image.
Yeah.
Addition to that. So we're trying to make a puzzle. We're trying to make it look like a horse, whereas the other side, it doesn't look at a horse like at all. It's a train. And then, you know, everyone's just arguing about it because one piece, you know, it mismatches against another or something like that. And it's just chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, that chaos is like, you know, is it allowed to happen by design? You know, which is, I think, the point that I believe you were trying to make is that it's by design that, you know, they allow it to do that, because when we're worrying about this, then, you know, of course, a bunch of stuff is going to happen in the background that we just see out of nowhere. And for the most part, it really doesn't concern us, you know, type of thing, you know, until it's too late. And then we can do nothing about it. Then we're like, well, wait a minute. When did X, Y, and Z happen of that nature?
Well, and this goes back to the question I've asked, you know, once or twice, which is, I'm going to be very careful with how I say this. It was real. We saw real fast how quickly YouTube and banks and all these other things were able to shut down people with opinions on particular subjects that may or may not sound like beer. Right. It's like how quickly they got shut down. Right. We saw it happen to Alex Jones, a bunch of others, but we saw how quickly they were shutting down channels left and right. They were shadow banning people, all these things.
Yeah. We had to learn to speak in code.
Exactly. Here's my question. Why aren't they doing that with this stuff, the Fortean community?
Well, do we know that they are?
Well, but so if the biggest show on the History Channel is, you know, Ancient Aliens, and we've got all these different Monster Quest ripoffs on the Travel Channel and American Channel and the American Travel Channel and the, you know, Travel Channel Plus, you know, it's like,
well, that's mainstream. That's mainstream.
Right.
The stuff that's on our level, I hear a lot of times where their channels get shut down and stuff like that, and usually it's because of crossfire from, you know, the beer bug type of stuff. At least that's the excuse that's used to shut down, because so many times, so many paranormal channels that are at our level have been shut down. You know, with this, well, you were talking about X, Y, and Z, and it's like their show isn't even about that, because they get caught in political crossfire when their shows don't even cover politics, or it's the net of you know, politics or whatever is politicized, weaponized at the moment, is used to take out these channels, when it's like, well, that's not what we're talking about. But then is it like, well, what were they talking about? You know, were they really shut down? Was it really an accidental algorithm mix-up? or was it, intentionally done, just to mess with them, just to poke us, to remind us, hey, you guys be careful, look out, we're still here.
That's God, I can go to so many different places with this, but I want to keep this. Next Monday, Jason.
I love it. I love it when I frustrate Rob.
Next Monday, I booked a guy on your show. His name's Val Zavala. Now,
yeah,
he was on my show twice in the last year. Data information with mostly Bigfoot here in Michigan. I had a conversation with him because we were talking about YouTube channels, and he has a guy that works for YouTube in analytics, whatever the word is, analytics. And I'm like, man, I want to crank that up for our YouTube shows. Can you give me some inside information? He goes, Rob, I'm going to tell you right now that, and I don't even want to say this on air, but like Chris was talking about, all these shows like ours that kind of, they don't get referred out, or there's a low rating because YouTube is just not sponsoring it, or they're not promoting it. But you know what? And I don't want to get into this, and I'll never have a show like this, but the #1 rated shows on YouTube where they send everybody is when you talk about politics and COVID. They get the most ratings on the platform. And I said, really? And I looked it up and I started going on some channels. And dadgummit, if I didn't see channels with 50,000 subscribers to talk about everything that we don't talk about, but nothing that I'm interested in, because I stopped watching the national media like 3 years ago. I just watched my local news and that's it. But I researched that. And you know what? You guys, he's going to be on Monday. I want you guys to ask him that, because it didn't blow my mind, but man, it's just what people are into. It's what YouTube and Google, which is probably owned by who? The Chinese. It's where they put everything. It's where they fashion and send everything to.
Well, so that actually brings me to a point that I wanted. I was thinking we'd get to in the first hour, but it's not all. It may actually require its own episode, which is the dead internet theory.
Yeah.
Right. Which is that the theory goes this way. 2015-ish was sort of like the peak. Humans actually interacting with other humans on the internet. But essentially, people stopped putting up with that, right? And they started leaving. But what happened was we saw the rise of bots. And that basically now 60% of all traffic is actually bots. It's manipulation of the system. We saw a lot of that when there was talk of Elon Musk buying Twitter. We saw, as soon as it was sort of said that it was going through, we saw in the movement of hundreds of thousands of followers on some of these, big name people, indicating that a lot of these things were bots. So the dead internet theory basically says so much of how things operate are driven by quote unquote traffic, but that it's actually bots, all of it. Government agencies, CIA, NSA, China, Russia, what they're trying to do is manipulate the system to get the outcome that they want, to make everyone think everyone thinks a certain way. So there's going to be less resistance. That's why it's like everything's fine on Tuesday, then on Wednesday, everything flips. And everyone's saying, it's like everyone's using the same language. Everyone's got the same images in their profiles, whole 9 yards, right? It's entirely possible that a lot of these, influencers aren't real at all. That they're all, or the majority of them, or perhaps the influencer is real, but that the people behind the influencer aren't real. And that they're driving this traffic, and they're creating the illusion of people agreeing with these ideas.
The apex of the useful idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I to build on that, I think it's that, like, because like, just look at with the Dave Chappelle fiasco, He said Twitter isn't real life, but all these companies, they think it is.
Mhm.
They behave as if it is. And because they behave as if it is, we have to deal with the consequences of it being that on some level. And say, for example, to see this in effect, like whenever a new episode of Batwoman would come out, it was the number one thing trending on Twitter.
Yeah.
Is Batwoman this.
No
And
one was watching it.
And no one was watching the show. And that should have been like a red flag that, hey, something's not
Yeah.
real here. That should be evidence enough that something's just not real going on. But, but all these companies look at, well, every single interaction is a potential buying customer. Every single interaction is a potential customer type of thing. And I think it's that sort of thinking is why, all of these companies now, these private companies are now at the mercy of activists and stuff like this, because they sort of pigeonholed themselves. They painted themselves into that corner, and now they're sort of dealing with it. And now, the entire economy might have to fall out from under all of us for them to finally get the hint that, hey, internet clicktivism isn't real type of thing. But as far as what that applies to us in our field, is that, we sort of have to deal with the baggage of that. We sort of have to, because we have to still swim in that pool to make stuff happen. Yeah. We still have to deal with algorithms. We still have to deal with stuff like that. And it irks me when, when YouTube is on everyone's phone. It's pre-installed in everybody's phone, regardless of whether you go there or not.
Right.
And to do any subversive or any, I guess, quote unquote, free thinker stuff, you have to go to either a Rumble or a BitChute or an alternative. And you have to actually jump. Some of them, you got to jump through hoops to install them.
Yeah.
And the thing is that with the easiest stuff to use, the path of least resistance is YouTube.
Yes.
And when they say, like Rob was saying, like all these people, they're talking politics and stuff like this. Yeah, they're allowed and pushed by the system to talk politics. When we talk politics and stuff like this, it doesn't matter whose side we're on. Yeah. When we talk about it, because we're not the establishment, we get struck down, we get our channels pulled, we get, banned and all this stuff and other stuff. And it is absolutely frustrating. And I share in your frustration in seeing that. And, and the thing is, if you get, the bigger you get, the more of a target you get put on you. I mean, it's got to the part that, being famous now isn't even worth it anymore, because it has so much trouble and drama, and there's so many crazy people in addition to, and who knows if these crazy people are even, if they're real or if they're just,
right.
If they're created,
absolutely.
by the system to keep people like us from, achieving a moniker of success. Because the moment we do, there's people showing up at our houses, there's our families are getting threatened and stuff of that nature. And it just gets ugly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this falls under the whole, again, just let everyone know how bad this stuff can get. Again, I'm not talking code, but we all remember that one day last January, right? One of the things that came up were these pipe bombs, right? That were found all over Washington, right? Several locations. Everyone made a big deal of these pipe bombs that were found. They were in public places near the the headquarters of the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, and supposedly some location that they made a big deal out of this that Harris was near. Those were basically in broad daylight. They were placed in broad daylight. They were found. They were defused. And the question that had to be asked is, hold on, we haven't made any arrests at all in those. There's no, in fact, a lot of insiders have said the investigation is active, but they don't have any suspects. So what you're telling me is there is someone who is so skilled in surveillance in surveillance illusion that they can get close enough to place these pipe bombs all over Washington, D.C., one of the most heavily
Yeah.
videoed places on Earth, and that that this person was able to construct these improvised devices in such a way that they were untrackable by purchases, and they left no DNA, no fingerprints, no nothing. That doesn't sound like some. It's like we have one of two truths here. Either the FBI isn't actually looking because they know who did it because it's one of them, right? This was a psyop.
Yeah. Controlled opposition.
Exactly. Or this was such a highly skilled individual that this isn't some guy who's just mad about the way the election went. This was a hyper professional. This is someone with black ops training who knew what they were doing. This is counterintelligence, which falls back to, okay, that still puts him on the side of the psyop, because that's what they're going to do. And the problem is, people like that, their bombs blow up. Their devices trigger. You don't defuse those. So again, we're back to, then there's only really one option, which is that it was a planned psyop to control the narrative. And and it goes back to, if they are willing to do that, what else are they willing to do to manipulate a broader narrative? And I want to bring that back to what we do, because how far are they going to be willing to go to manipulate this? And if they're going to manipulate us, why? What do they get out of it? Why would they want to manipulate us?
I don't know. I mean, are Bigfoot bodies made out of oil or something, or do they have some sort of like resource of that? Because a lot of people would ask the question, and it's an open speculation of like, well, what would happen if Bigfoot is proven, like without a doubt, and stuff like that? And of course, the first place that people go is, well, they liken it to the spotted owl thing, where the logging and resource management people, that they would throw a fit because they would somehow lose all this money. When in my opinion, I think that it would just be business as usual. It's just now that Bigfoot is real, we're going to have like an influx of people going into all these national parks, and that's where they're going to have to spend a lot of their money, is in crowd control, to keep people from trashing the national parks, because everything would go as usual, because as far as we know, there hasn't been an official disruption of the natural trade. And again, I'm speculating, so I really don't know of that nature. I'm sure that stuff would happen, if like a Bigfoot body showed up on a logging route, that something would be done, a committee would be formed, and stuff would be made so that was dealt with in a in an ethical manner. But I don't think that it would slow production down. And a lot of people, the naysayers on our side, like to say, well, it would, if a Bigfoot body would stop everything, it would stop a trade of people who have too much money to take a day off, type of thing.
I just don't think that the logging industry would be powerful enough for that to be the motivation. I think there would have to be something else, unless Rob has another opinion.
No, I was just about to say with Chris, and kind of probably what you were going to say, Jason. I think that, again, with the economics, I don't know what it is with the logging industry. Let's just say in the Pacific Northwest. Now, you guys realize there's 1.5 billion acres of undiscovered territory, unexplored territory still in North America.
Oh, yeah.
Which is abundant. I don't know if I will say this. Let's say that I was a big tycoon in Oregon, and I was in the lumber industry, and I've got a secluded area. There's no people, travelers, no gawkers, nobody on vacation going in my area, and it's secluded. And I think that if a Bigfoot discovery was made, and I think I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that I'm guessing that if anybody has seen a dead Bigfoot, it might be in that industry. I'm not so sure that they wouldn't want to keep that under wraps, simply to keep their business. Just they don't want the advertising, right? They don't want it publicly known, just so it keeps their little operations going. And again, to Chris's point, I don't think that it's going to stop the industry. I still think they'll make money, but I think a lot of these independent people, what they rely on, I don't think they want the traffic.
Well, the activists are already getting up their ass anyway,
right?
Well,
So
Tony makes a great point, and this actually kind of ties into your question earlier, Rob, about what do we actually make in this country anymore?
yeah,
Houses are
houses.
houses are one of the few things we actually still manufacture. We actually
Yeah.
still create them. That's still a huge industry. So theoretically, I could see that being a motivating factor. I have a suspicion that if the government has any involvement in this, or if our conversations, they kind of want these things promoted, or the topic promoted to one way or another to manipulate us one way or the other, it's not just the logging industry. It's not the housing industry per se. I think there's something else. I think there's more. Again, there's a broader narrative that they're fighting, that they're trying to control. And the fact, and the problem is, even if someone, again, going back to the whole demoralization point, if a government official came out and said, guys, this is the problem, this is why they're doing this, would we even believe it?
Mm.
Or would we just say, great, you're another disinformation officer?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's. I think we can only come to the truth by having these conversations, by bringing people of differing opinions and differing thoughts on the channel, and talking about it openly, honestly, and double checking our own assumptions, right? I know a lot of people don't like to have their assumptions checked, but I mean, the problem is sometimes it's our assumptions that lead us astray. We think we're looking at one thing when it's another. And we see that. I mean, how often does that happen in our own lives, right? Some dude is talking to you, you assume they're talking about one thing and they're talking about something else entirely, and you're having a completely different conversation, right?
Just like the assumption I made last weekend or the other weekend, where I thought it would take 3.5 hours to get home from Alabama, and it took 12.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you know what happens when you make an assumption? You make an ass out of you. And umption.
Absolutely.
And umption does not like that. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. You're great. We love you. We gotta have you. We gotta have you back. So, guys, thank you for putting up with this conversation. I know a lot of people were like, "What's going on? What are we talking about?" It's like, well, that's the thing. This is a big topic, right? This isn't a one and done thing. It's, in fact, the entire point is the confusion within our community writ large. We have to start asking these questions. We have to start approaching that, because it's not just Sasquatch, it's all of it, right? It's forbidden archaeology, it is the paranormal, it's ufology. These are all things that that obviously the mainstream doesn't want us to actually approach, that doesn't want us to talk about, and the confusion and chaos in our world may not necessarily be just due to the fact that our subjects are highly strange. It may be part of a deliberate endeavor, and that's something we have to be aware of. We have to understand and explore. Again, Chris, guys, go follow Chris, like his work. Again, in the most HR appropriate way, butter his buns. And we will see y'all next time. Rob, who do you have coming on again tomorrow on tomorrow morning show?
Tomorrow, Kelly Rainbow. She's an author. She has a book called The Sacred Sasquatch. And she's an event organizer in Oregon, of which, Jason, by the way, I'm trying to get us booked on for 2023. So Tex will be happy, because my other new job is I have to put us on all these conferences, which is another
Yep.
more money in my pocketbook. Tex has got the deep pockets, as we all know, the oil man, Tex Wesson. But yes, no, that'd be a great show. And then, of course, Jessica Jones, this what's that, Scape or Swamp?
Yeah,
is that correct? And
yeah,
then
Scape or Swamp. Yeah, it's a great story.
So that's to be a great one. Our show tomorrow will be great. Jason, what do you got for Serial Papers?
Tomorrow, tomorrow night we are going to be talking these. I just forgot the word. Simulation theory. Sorry, we're going to be talking simulation theory. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Monday I can already prognostic ahead. Val Zavala, the Data Man.
Yeah,
talk a little YouTube.
Oh yeah, No, we're definitely gonna talk some YouTube.
But
And
he,
I
but
love
he,
Bill Zavala. Yeah, I loved it. I loved your interview with him. I was like, yeah, we gotta
yeah,
have this
he's a
guy
great
back.
guy, man. He's
Mhm.
in fact, he's from my state here in Michigan. And in fact, a show we're gonna have to do, Shelby Township, which is about an hour and a half from where I live. I saw it on the news. You guys all look it up. It's on Fox News. You guys go on Google. We had a supposed Bigfoot sighting, and they captured it. Well, they didn't capture it, but they captured it and presented it on the news. So that's pretty cool. I want to do a show on that here in the upcoming weeks.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Again, everyone, like, follow, subscribe, hit that bell, send us to your friends, enemies, in-laws, outlaws. You know, you never
Yep.
know.
Yeah,
Your
thank you.
favorite FBI, your favorite and undercover FBI agent.
Yeah.
You know, we
Hey,
Put us on all the lists.
yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you, Chris, man, for joining. And don't forget, Texas Front Porch, our flagship. Mondays, Texas Front Porch, 6:30 Central. Wednesdays, Jason McLean questions everything at 9 Central. Thursdays, 12 Central, brunch with Bigfoot Michigan Rob. Jason McLean, Serial Papers, 9 Central. And of course, the lovely and talented Jessica Jones. Friday, remote viewing with Jessica. They all can be found on Texas Front Porch and Bigfoot Michigan Rob. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to everybody in chat and everybody listening later on, either tomorrow, the next day, the next month, whenever. Just listen. Just listen. Share and subscribe. Share and subscribe.
Not everybody.